Hi, I'm Suzanne Anderson, psychologist, executive coach, international speaker, and the co-author of the book, The Way of the Mysterial Woman, Upgrading How You Live, Love, and Lead. And actually, I'm excited to tell you today that yesterday we just heard that our book won the Gold Award of the Nautilus Book Awards, the 2016 Nautilus Book Awards, in the women's category. So we're super excited about that and about the possibility of the book getting more exposure and being able to contribute to the work that I'm the most passionate about, which is the awakening of consciousness and leadership capacity in women today. So I'm very excited about that news. And I want to welcome you today to the fourth in my series of short video blogs about the Mysterial Sequence. Now, for those of you that just are coming in here to this video on the Maiden Wound, I want to pull back for a moment and give you a sense of the overall arch of the work itself that I'm presenting, so that you can see where this fourth gate fits. So I've been a couple of decades actually doing research trying to decode a pathway for women that could unlock the next level of what I call our evolutionary potential. And I wanted this pathway to be accelerated, embodied, integral, to really work in a way that allowed us as women to bring all of our feminine and masculine capacities together. And it was my sense then when I began, and I certainly feel this is confirmed now, that this is in a certain sense an evolutionary imperative. In other words, we actually need all of these feminine and masculine capacities right now to be a match for the challenges of our own personal lives and of the world today. So through the 10 plus years really of research through my university certificate women's leadership programs, we found this path, and it took actually investigating the whole cycle of women's development. How do we develop from the time of being a baby all the way up into elderhood? And what we discovered as we did this is that there were 5 very distinct nodes, you could say, along this developmental pathway when either a feminine or a masculine, a yin or a yang essence was wanting to light up. So the first 3 gates we've already done, and if you haven't seen those yet, I would recommend actually you go back and watch the first 3. So that would be the mother, the hero, and the father archetypes, so that you can come into the maiden with a sense of what went before, because in my view the work that needs to be done actually does need to be done in this sequence for it to be transformational, in the long term. But let's just say, starting with the 3rd gate, which is the father, the video I just did, this introduces us to a whole new and relatively unknown feminine and masculine polarity. Most times when we talk about the feminine and masculine, we think of, more traditionally, of what I call the mother and the hero energy. So that is to say, the mother being that all-loving, all-encompassing ground of being, receptive feminine force, kind of vessel-like in its nature. And then the other end of that dynamic of fiery, sort of agentic, piercing, goal-oriented, masculine energy. But in our research, over working with hundreds of women, began to see something else happening. There was an aspect of the masculine that had a more feminine quality to it, had a more stable essence to it, and that was the father. And there was also an aspect of the feminine that had a more dynamic or fiery, almost masculine aspect to it. And this brings us to the maiden. So now the other thing I think I need to say here before we go into the maiden, which is what I want to do here with you in this little video, is give you a sense of why does this archetype matter for us as women? Why is it so significant? How do we tend to be wounded here? And then I want to give you a couple of practices that you can actually do to get started in nourishing this yin essence. Let me say that in the grand sweep of culture, which you've heard me talk about in all the other videos if you've watched them, We're coming out of a 5,000-year-old, roughly, masculine paradigm of wholeness. And it kind of peaked with the father archetype. So while the maiden archetype in terms of our own development, let's say, it has been around in terms of its viability in the developmental cycle for a long time, we would say it's a relative newcomer in terms of the cultural unfolding. So we believe that in the 60s, this was the beginning of the second, really the sort of the most overt way to say the second feminine epoch really began there. The seeds for it happened earlier with the suffragettes, but it didn't really come into its fullness until the mid-60s. And this maiden energy was in direct opposition, you could say, to the patriarchy, to the father writ large, right? The father that had just gotten way hypermasculine, that archetype that had gone way past its prime in a certain sense. And then this energy came in to want to bust everything up. That is, we saw the sexual revolution, we saw the psychedelic revolution, equal rights, return to the land, the hippie movement. It was everything that was not the establishment. This is a perfect sort of classic example of what I call dynamic feminine, the dynamic yin essence of the maiden. And now, in the absence of women knowing that this is actually a developmental move forward, well, for culture, but let's just look at women's development. For women, when they've reached the fullness of the father, they've done everything they were supposed to do to be successful and happy. And they're still not feeling happy. And all of a sudden, this impulse lights up inside, which developmentally it is designed to do. The only way that we can interpret that is that we've either done something wrong, which is one of the interpretations I see in women that I work with. How I've failed in some way. I'm supposed to be so happy in what's happened. And then they dial down this fiery essence that's trying to come online. We dial it down with numbing agents, with TV, with drugs, with alcohol, with overwork. We dial it down with antidepressants. We want to turn off this flame that's actually trying to engage to move us to the next level of our potentiality. The other thing we can sometimes do, which is I also see quite often, is that women will come in to work with me or into one of my programs and say, I've had it, I'm done. I can't work any longer at this corporation or in this position, or I have to leave my partner, or I have to leave my country, I need to go and move to Nepal, or a sense that this, and often that, by the way, what I hear is, I want to go back to where I was, that free young girl who I was. What happened to her? I want her back. In a sense that the only way I'm going to get there is if I leave these environments that I'm in, that they're the problem. And so often that is what happens with a lot of unintended consequences, actually. The sort of shattering of all that was built appropriately when the father archetype came online. So what's really important here today for you to understand is that the impulse for this awakening impulse to be spontaneous, to find your creative expression, to want to break things up, to want to loosen the hold of some of the structures of your life, to want to find your wild self, maybe for the first time or maybe again, I would call these evidence of the lighting up of this beautiful fourth gate in our developmental pathway. And the second feminine gate, it's not the mother essence. This is actually a fiery yin essence. And we've gotten this confused in our culture. Often when it's lit up in women, we've been accused of being too masculine or too yang. And I think this has been the confusion with the hero energy. The hero energy, when that flame yang energy comes in, it's very directional, it's very focused. It's the way we get things done. It's the way we accomplish goals and stay focused and have boundaries. But the Maiden's quite different. While fiery, so it has that sort of yang essence to it, it actually doesn't go in a straight line. In fact, it's much more about flowing back and forth, and it's much more about challenging the status quo and thinking outside the box. It's a beautiful capacity to be opening up. So a wonderful quote by one of probably the mother of modern dance, Isadora Duncan. She said, "You were wild once, don't let them tame you." So there is something here about reconnecting, and as I say, maybe for some of you it's for the first time, connecting with a wilder impulse inside where we find our intuition, where we find this ways of knowing that are deep in the spontaneous and connected tissues of our body. This is the place where we dance in life. If the mother might be the energy in the first gate, where you lie down in a great receptive welcoming of all that is, being with what is. We could say that the Maiden is when you stand up in the joy of the dance of life, in the joy of your own creativity, actually. And you have a sort of delight in the ahas of being yourself. You're surprised by yourself. You're surprised by life. You're surprised by what you say, by what you do each day, by the quality of relationships that unfold around you. And the Maiden is very much about relationship, and it's about how we connect in more intimate and sensual ways with the world, and certainly with those in our world. Now, when the Maiden Wound is operating here, we tend to do one of two things. We tend to either overdo that connection to the Maiden, and we become sort of the sexually promiscuous, or the bohemian, the one that will never have rules and regulations, sort of pushes against some of the structures of the father and just wants to be the wild, free child out there in the world. Or the other side is, well, I don't want any contact with that energy, and I'm just going to button it all down and be the good girl. So we can see it in some ways. The wound says to us, don't trust your intuition. It's where you lean back into the father again, valuing only the rational. It's the wound where we are afraid of our own sexuality, where we think it's shameful, where the natural connection to our desire or pleasure has been numbed. We don't either feel we deserve it or we're afraid of it. What happens if we really make contact with our desire? Of course, not just sexually, I mean your creative desire. This is the kind of juice that gives your purpose its passion, right? This is what gives you the incentive to go through some of the difficult things that you need to go through in bringing your creative expression into the world, because you are so connected to this passionate impulse that it keeps you alive through some of the more difficult, demanding, sort of steadfast, disciplined kind of tasks you have to do with the father. And then there's a way in which our wild nature, or even knowing our wild nature, is not permitted. We enter in here in the wound into the territory of shame. Shame to be in a sensual body, shame to love what we love, shame to love who we love. So this wound is intense, and it's intense in our culture right now, because as we're seeing here in the United States, there's a kind of pushback toward women and some of women's rights. We see some of the shadow masculine aspects of the father and the hero rising up right now. This is why it's more important than ever before that we absolutely get in touch with the Maiden energy within ourselves and We get in touch with the healthy aspect of the maiden energy when we have actually gone through the first 3 gates of the sequence. Then when this energy comes in, we can trust it. So the limiting belief of the maiden when it's operating is, it is not safe to express myself fully. It's not safe to express myself fully. So take a moment right now and just see if you resonate with that. If there are ways in your life right now that that's actually running underneath the surface. It's not safe to express myself fully. The way in which you pull back inside your shell, or sometimes overexpress just to try to get yourself out there, but it's not always to your advantage, or you wound yourself or maybe wound others in the process because it's not moving from a ground of the liberating belief, which when you've done the deeper shadow work arises. And that liberating belief is, I am free to express my true nature. Now feel that. I am free to express my true nature. It's beautiful to sense the freedom here at the beginning of this liberating belief. I don't have to prove anything. This freedom is inherent in me now. And I am committed to expressing myself, but not just anything, my true nature. So this gives you a sense of what's at stake to bring this healthy archetype in. And let me give you now a couple of practices that can get you started. Of course, the book that we wrote that I mentioned earlier has a lot of practices in the chapter and a case study that kind of takes you through 2 different students that we've worked with, that you see them in the midst of the Maiden Wound and then how they actually healed that. But the first practice I want to give you is the same I'm giving in every archetype, and it's the practice of self-observation. Always start here because this is essential. If we are going to become unhooked from these deeply unconscious limiting beliefs, we have to begin to recognize them showing up. And this is the part that consciousness plays. So go through a week, spend the next week, see if you notice ways in which the limiting belief of the maiden is showing up for you. It is not safe to express myself fully. When you find those moments when you're shrinking back, when you're doubting yourself, when you are feeling activated, see if that belief is operating. And the very act of even noticing it begins to already disrupt the habitual pattern that has it locked in as a part of your operating structure. So that's the first practice. And the second practice, I call this going with the emergent flow. And what I invite you to do is, since you can do this anytime, probably best to do on a morning when you don't have other work obligations. Because what I'm going to suggest you do is you give yourself an hour at a minimum, and you go for that period of time simply following, and simple is a little bit of an unfair way to say it because it's not always so simple, but let's say working to follow your desire and your pleasure and your joy. So it's important to do this practice alone so that you're not moved from your own pleasure by somebody else's desire. This is a practice I used to do every Saturday morning. And I would go to a yoga class, first of all, and then I would allow myself to wander around the town that I lived in, go to the market, and chat as long as I wanted, talking to the vegetable grower or the wine producer or whoever I wanted to talk to until I had actually finished it. I was complete, that I no longer had pleasure in doing that. And then I would move on. I would run into people I might know, might go into an art gallery. I might sit on the bench and watch children in the park. I was simply following my desire or my pleasure. I invite you to do it, and I hope that you find it you find moments of pleasure. Don't be surprised if you find it also a little bit challenging at first. But I invite you to stay with it. Like, what do I desire? I don't know. I'm empty. But stay empty until the desire arises. Just keep surrendering to the moment and asking yourself, what do I want now? What do I want now? Oh, I want a cup of tea. Okay, go and get a cup of tea. I just want to sit with my cup of tea for 10 minutes. Okay, do that. And notice after you've done this, what your body feels like when you have given yourself to flow like this. Flow, which is such an aspect of the maiden, where she is moved spontaneously by her intuition, by her pleasure. Clarissa Piccola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, has this to say that I think just so perfectly captures the maiden energy. She says, within every woman there lies a powerful force filled with good instincts, passionate creativity, and ageless knowing. She is the wild woman who represents the instinctual nature of woman. But she is an endangered species. So I invite you to be one of the women who starts to bring alive the maiden within yourself now. We need this energy on the planet. We need this energy in our own lives for the fulfillment we are looking for, to influence others in our community and the world. So I thank you for exploring this, and I invite you to post comments on the blog page. So I'd love to hear what your own experience is of the Maiden Wound, maybe how you're working with it. And of course, this video is designed to just whet your appetite. What I really want you to do is to go deeper with the work, to do what's sometimes a little bit more difficult and unravel from the shadow holdings here. My book will help with that, but also I run the Mysterial Leadership Essentials course, and I invite you to consider signing up for that. It's a 10-week global online course where we awaken each of the archetypes, and it's a really perfect way to get this process started. You can find out more about me and the work at mysterialwoman.com, and I really hope to have a chance to engage with you in this unfolding mysterial movement. Bye for now.